Classroom of the Elite Year 2 Volume 2. This volume was officially the start of the biggest special exam that has been held so far in this series, although technically, we didn't get the exact details but just the ones we got were complicating and fulfilling enough, though I mean they were assigning bonuses or handicapped effects like in Mario Kart for frick's sakes. Of the exam that was to be held in summer, what we did got to know was that this special exam would be covered in 3 volumes. At first there was some confusion about whether it would be covered in 2 volumes or 3 or possibly even more. But right now at least the island exam would end within Year 2 Volume 4. They might still leave out some afterwards shit that would take place in the ship, but that's okay. They didn't rush with this special exam, and it's really cool. Since it's obviously going to be the deciding exam of the battle between Ayonkoji and Tsukushiro and Nagumo too. Or at least I hope so, and whether Ayonkoji gets expelled or manages to outsmart everyone. So anyway, the volume starts with much anticipated monologue of the White Room student, and of course he or she didn't say anything about their identity, class, or gender. What they did in length talk about was how much hate he or she carried. So basically no matter how much of a logic incentive or inhumane of an institution you create to mass produce insensitive robotic genius. At the end of the day, human being still likes to engage in drama. From Tsukushiro we found out in the previous volume how the White Room students are jealous of Ayonkoji Kiyotaka and hate him to death. But that's not quite the case. There exists a White Room student who hates Ayonkoji, but the other White Room students, after hearing so much about Ayano God's miraculous feats, have decided to worship him. So basically this White Room student whose monologue we are currently reading about, has much hatred for the Ayonkoji cause they are basically the best at their own generation but are still treated like a bloody failure. This student knows that the White Room's aim is to mass-produce genius like Ayonkoji, and that makes him who is not on Ayonkoji's level a failure. He or she also talks about how at first he was in denial about the existence of Ayonkoji, but then he did see Ayonkoji. Much like how Sakyongi saw Ayonkoji through the one-way glass wall, he or she must have seen Ayonkoji perform some crazy-ass feat. But that only made the hate increase. And then there were the other students in the White Room who worshipped this other person, that they were supposed to compete with. That made the White Room student hate him even more and feel disgust for the other members of the Ayonkoji fandom. I mean, imagine being surrounded by a fandom all the time, and meanwhile you hate everything about it. Makes you hate them even more. Although the White Room student himself never minded the hatred much, he used it as a fuel, and since he was the top among the 5th generation, it clearly worked for him. And this fuel also comes with enough tank to go down the kill road. Anyway, after that possible attempted murder foreshadowing, we pick things up from where we left at the Year 2 Volume 1. Ayonkoji has scored the perfect marks, and the people demand answers. Clearly something Ayonkoji isn't keen to give. And so after leaving the, shivering from excitement Chabashira-sensei, Ayonkoji enters the classroom to find himself face to face with a pissed-off Yukimura. So before Ayonkoji arrived, a discussion did take place between the students, where the intelligent Yukimura basically acted salty and at the same time talked about how much of a ridiculously high achievement it is to get such a high score in a test of that difficulty. Foiling K's plan to downplay that achievement. It's a relief that people didn't downplay that perfect score, even though the students of Class D seems ignorant and oblivious to a fault. The Ayonkoji group was surprised and hurt. And although I do say Yukimura acted salty, it is a bit understandable, considering he was upstaged by a guy he was actually teaching. Although in the previous volumes it was said that Horikita told Yukimura that Ayonkoji is smarter than he lets on. But I guess Yukimura didn't think he was that smart. He did act a bit too salty in the end. He also talked about the possibility of cheating and Ayonkoji being dishonest, and the one who came to his defense was Sudo. Not really surprising for the readers considering he had gotten a look at the Ayano god in the previous volume. All said and done, Yukimura bitched a lot when Ayonkoji wasn't there yet. Hasabi tried to calm him. Sakura suffered from social anxiety. Kei went full on with her act of a dumb guru. She knew Ayonkoji wouldn't want a big deal to be made out of this, but Yukimura was buying none of that. Maths genius shit, he needed a thorough explanation. And when Ayonkoji came back to the classroom, Yukimura did get an explanation. Just, not from Ayonkoji like he wanted but rather Horikita, who once again decided to speak up for him just like she did in the class vote. Saying she could explain more about it rather than person in question himself. And I am surprised that more people didn't snap at her for that. But ultimately she did give a speech. Talking about how it was planned, although the small details didn't match up. The author went too much time has passed, so these people don't remember much, route. And people were convinced by that clear lie which had vague reasons and even more vague proof. Not saying there wasn't proof since it did help the case that Ayonkoji and Horikita talked a lot in the beginning, but the details of who approached who and how stone cold Horikita was back then, it all had to be very vague from the student's point of view. And truth be told, shit like that can only happen in Class D. I mean there was a reason Class D has to be hard carried by Ayonkoji. But there were still some students who were not convinced. Which once again was a relief cause if all students just bought into this speech. I don't think they would have deserved to be reached Class A, carry or not. And there also goes the credit to Hirata and Kei who quickly acted so as to convince more people of Horikita's speech. Like Ayonkoji spoke, that how typical the behavior was, that since someone like Hirata and Kei, people of high social status said they believed Horikita, the normies are gonna follow. That's just basically every other person's first instinct. To just go with the flow. But Yukimura still remained resolute in his search, fought the answers and confronted Ayonkoji along with 60% of the Ayonkoji group. But they did reach a stalemate and things did smooth over, through the efforts of Hasabi. And there was a very interesting reaction from Hasabi. It's obviously related to her previous monologue where she talked about her ideal man and Ayonkoji possibly being more than he lets on. And now that Ayonkoji has shown his brilliance, he has obviously become Hasabi's ideal man that she thought she would pursue with all her heart. And it's all gonna be very interesting when we get Hasabi's monologue the next time. And then there was the other class's reaction to Ayonkoji's perfect score. This time the scores were shared across the whole year which made Ayonkoji's score even more awesome since he scored more than the genius Sakyangi. The ones who reacted to Ayonkoji scoring a perfect score were Kanzaki and Ichino's. Kanzaki seems to have burnt his fangs, like he told Ryu before he too is more than he lets on. And now that Ichino's strategy has failed, he wants to go down his own route. And that involves some hostility. Kanzaki was quite cautious, and hostile towards Ayonkoji. Which was right considering his position. Ichino's on the other hand just thought Ayonkoji was amazing just like she had thought, just like she would expect from a man she fell for. Although Ayonkoji himself thought that she should have been more cautious to him. And considering the heavy foreshadowing that has been there from Volume 4, I do think Ayonkoji is gonna crush Ichino's at some point, and right now Ichino's has fallen heavily under Ayonkoji's tool spell. Then after some time, about when Ayonkoji's had started looking better, came the details about the new island exam, and some details were thrown at the students. That they had to make a team, and just like you would expect from a Chad, Ayonkoji decided to go solo and for any other pairing in the class he decided to leave that shit to Horikita. Now here is the thing. I would really like to think that Ayonkoji did way more stuff than that which has been let on in this volume. Cause here Ayonkoji didn't do much for the preparation of exam. He went for a kiss with Kei but was interrupted by the doorbell ringing, which was just Aikika playing mind games with the hiding of the bag, and giving Kei and Ayonkoji a freaking condom. He also rejected Albert the Chad and Azaki and Hiyori. Hiyori knew that they were gonna get rejected but just went along with Azaki's bullshit cause she wanted to spend some time with Ayonkoji. We also found out that Azaki doesn't clean after he masturbates and just leaves the tissue lying around in his room. Like really, come on dude. And Albert is a flag enthusiastic. That was weird. The most interesting encounter Ayonkoji had was with Kushida's alleged kohai, Yagami, who talked all sweet. But I don't think anyone bought his bullshit. He did tell Ayonkoji that the first-year students were working against him because of the bounty Nagumo had told them about. Kushida was with them the whole time and faked the appropriate sound effects at the right time. Although she also went into emo mode when Ayonkoji and her were alone talking about how everyone who knew about her secret needed to be gone. After that Ayonkoji did encounter the students from first-year Class C. Tsubaki seemingly wanted to psychoanalysis him. And Yutomiya wanted to talk about the strange event that had taken place among the first years. There were many things going on between the first years and it seemed like a student from Class C got expelled. And Yutomiya thinks Housen allegedly had something to do with it. And for that reason he said that he won't go after Ayonkoji but rather after Housen. In fact he might as well had offered Ayonkoji an alliance to go against Housen. But of course Ayonkoji doesn't trust that easy. The interesting thing here is who exactly expelled that student from Class C, and why. I think it's gonna be a plot point in the future volume. Aside from these encounters Ayonkoji didn't come across as someone who was plotting something big. He just went around being horny Koji but didn't take much action. Among the first years many plans were being made. Like Nanase met Ayonkoji earlier on and told him some lies or truths about the first year student's situation. About how since Housen had failed in expelling him, the other students weren't that eager to try their hands on him. Nanase did offer her concern regarding Ayonkoji's injury. How she was sad it came to that and how she didn't think it was worth getting his hand hurts, quite contradictory since she was partially responsible for the injury. And how she reacted then. Showing some bipolar signs. And then at the end of this volume they did show her receiving instructions from Tsukushiro, so she is working under him. Then there was the pairing. Aikika rather brazenly approached Housen. She and Housen had teamed up previously in the knife incident. Although later Aikika did say that she never meant the strategy to work. In fact she went out of her way to make Ayonkoji notice their strategy. More importantly, Housen is a very served case of a stereotype. Especially given how she treats Nanase, so it did make sense that Aikika had to show some of her crazy to make Housen consider a girl like her someone worth teaming up with. So that was one group. The other prominent first-year group was the one which was formed through the alliance of the three classes. They had meeting with all four classes representative. And we also meet the new character who is the representative of Class A who looks to be some kind of happy-go-lucky guy. But I do think he is very much suspicious considering how he is the sole person who hasn't directly come in contact with Ayonkoji and haven't seen much of. But of course the main focus of attention are the first years who were in that picture. And it is no surprise that Housen doesn't get along with the other classes. The alliance was supposed to be of all four classes in first year, since they have been given the advantage to form a group of four. Plus they have to overcome the vast gap between them in the third year. Utomiya and Housen had argument because Utomiya holds Housen accountable for the expelling of his classmates, although I have my doubts about that. Utomiya surprisingly isn't scared to stand up to Housen, meaning he has to have some kind of strength. But then things gets a bit smoothed over although Housen isn't exactly their ally. And then another important first-year group was formed. Then there are the third-year students. Things are much clearer for them. The class competition between them has already been settled since the gap between them is too huge. All that's left is for Nagumo to try and crush all the other year's classes and get himself crushed in the process. And there is also Kuriyama's last stand to consider. Although Ayonkoji clearly doesn't have any expectations for Kuriyama, along with the readers. He has decided that this exam would be his last stand against Nagumo. By doing this he is risking his position as the vice president, which I think he is bound to lose. But more importantly we get to know about the older female version of Kuenji, and that is the third-year Class B student Kuriyuan. Kuriyuan is just as arrogant as Kuenji, moreover doesn't seem to give a rat's ass about the class competition. And she is clearly highly talented, you can tell that just by the way Nagumo treats her. Although that does make things a bit more sad for Kuriyama. Just like Yukimura did at one point with Kuenji, he too must have begged Kuriyuan to take some action for the sake of the class, but alas that was to no avail. And Kuriyama is clearly irritated by that. Who wouldn't be? Kuriyuan and Nagumo must have some history too but she doesn't seem to hold him in as high regard as the rest of the year. Who seems to think of Nagumo as some almighty god. Or demon. Kuriyuan talks about how her standards of men are higher than even Nagumo and she is going to look out for that. Her talk with Ayonkoji is brief, but she does seem to take a slight interest in him. Now with the island test, that interest increases or not is another thing. Then let's talk about Arbois year, the second year. Sakyangi and Ryuan are plotting much to gain an upper hand against each other. Sakyangi has decided to ally with Ichinos who was in much need of something like this. Given their history, most people would find it hard to ally with someone who toyed with them and almost got them into serve depression, but being the Saint Ichinos is, living with motto of forgive and forget. She still decided to go under Sakyangi's banner. Her class is kind of in losing streak, so that too is a solid motivation. Sakyangi herself knows that Ichinos has to be desperate for a win, so she feels comfortable using her like a pawn knowing she won't betray her. Although Ichinos did show some of her spirit and agreed on some good conditions and transaction of points between them. Talking about points, since 1 million points means a safe ticket for the exam. Ayonkoji decided to act like the perfect boyfriend and secure those 1 million points by selling the card he had gotten his hand on. Although the card was the rarest there was, what with it being able to double the points. That would have been a good advantage for Ayonkoji but still. And that's when Ryuan comes in. Ryuan called out to Ayonkoji to buy his card from him and when Ayonkoji gets called out by Ryuan he sees him and the man who has suffered the most by a loli, Katsuragi. Finally, after having spent full year of being harassed by a loli, Katsuragi's delinquent prince has finally come to save him. Baring his chest Ryuan declares to Katsuragi that he can buy his freedom. Ryuan is determined to get Katsuragi in his class by paying the 20 million points. For that he is also prepared to sacrifice the contract between him and Class A. He is gonna sold the contract to Sakyongi, and with those points plus the points saved up by his own class he is going to have Katsuragi come over to his class. Of course, being the cautious baldy he is, Katsuragi does have some questions regarding this all, but at the end, the proposal by Ryuan is the way to his freedom. And witnessing all that is a Yonkoji who just wants to sell his card for those delicious points. There was some interesting things that happened in this interaction. When Katsuragi asked about a Yonkoji being there, Ryuan in front of Katsuragi says to a Yonkoji to not pull any more bullshit as he is the one who defeated him. He literally said this in front of Katsuragi. And when I first read that, I was like, wow, cool, that means Katsuragi too knows about a Yonkoji's abilities. But many of the people had different things to say about that. Some people commented that Katsuragi doesn't believe in what Ryuan said. In fact, they said that Katsuragi believes that Ryuan was joking around when he said that, or just trying to pull his leg. And hence Katsuragi still doesn't know about a Yonkoji's abilities. And, God forbid, if that's the truth. That's the biggest load of bullshit I have ever heard. What with the perfect score and Ryuan saying that in front of Katsuragi, if Katsuragi somehow still doesn't know about a Yonkoji actually being a frickin' genius. Then I am frickin' out. There's just no way that bullshit is gonna pass. Then there is Horikita, as accordance to the bet between her and a Yonkoji. Horikita finally joins the student council, where as expected, Nagumo creepily welcomes her. In her monologue, Horikita talks about how she joined the student council because of a Yonkoji and wants to be acknowledged by him. Not necessarily in a romantic sense but more like partners. She finally holds a Yonkoji in a high regard, but not like how she was with her brother where she just blindly followed him and copied him. But as in the sense of her doing things in her own unique way and accomplishing her goal, much like how a Yonkoji accomplishes his goals. So that's quite the development. And then there happens to be the rivalry between Horikita and Ibuki, and to be honest it would have all been forgotten about from Ibuki's side after she found out about the identity of X, aka a Yonkoji. I mean, she hated Horikita on the ship because she thought Horikita had managed to outsmart her, but that was not the case. A Yonkoji had outsmarted her. And Ibuki knows that. But there still exists this weirdly heated rivalry between them. In fact, Ibuki in this volume mentioned how she hated Horikita more than a Yonkoji, which doesn't make any sense. Although of course she might be keeping on an act. I mean, Ibuki hates everyone, so it marks sense for her to hate a girl who is just as good as her in martial arts, and is somewhat of a rival with a history. But after the things that happened between her and a Yonkoji in Volume 7 and 7.5. Plus the fact that she mentioned in Volume 7.5 that she now hated two people the most in the world. Ryuan and a Yonkoji. Her heated rivalry with Horikita, I would have expected it to diminish quite a bit. And then there is the internal stuff in Class D. Ike's horniness basically made him lose his chance with making a team with the love of his life, Shinohara. And just at the right moment the guy from the other class took his opportunity and managed to group up with Shinohara. So Ike had no choice but to settle down and make a group with his bois. Others' reaction towards this was quite sympathetic, although Horikita showcased her lack of knowledge in the matters of love. If it was a Yonkoji from before he would have joined in with Horikita's obliviousness, but since he had been studying the book a lot more than usual, he has been able to grasp the weight of such actions. By the way, Horikita also decided to go solo, just like a Yonkoji, although she would most certainly make a group quickly like a Yonkoji had suggested. Yukimura made his own group, aiming for the top, while Hasabi and Akito have decided to carry Sakura throughout this exam. Although who knows, the exam tests are well-rounded, so she might also get her time to shine among her group. After seeing her supposed rival go solo, Ibuki also decided to go solo, which was a deliberate action on Horikita's part. Then there is the oddity of the series, Kuenji. Horikita managed to find a good use for him, although Kuenji seemed to know exactly what he was getting himself into, and basically made a bet with him. If he placed first in this exam, then Kuenji wouldn't have to do anything for the class ever again, and his protection in case of a test like the class vote would be guaranteed. If he doesn't, he would just have to try his best from then forwards. Another win-win bet for Horikita with much the similar conditions as before. Although her track record isn't exactly good in those things, I do like these bets, because they seem to be working well with exposing people's abilities.